Good evening. My name is Amy Leiser, and I am the Executive Director of the Monroe County Historical Association, and I am delighted that you have joined us for our third Thursday lecture series. On your screen, you will find a menu bar with controls to submit questions via the Q&A function. We ask that you use this Q&A function to post all of your questions for tonight's speaker. Posting the questions in the Q&A helps Tanya and I keep track of them during the presentation. Now, questions can be asked anytime, but they won't be answered until after the program. I am very happy to introduce you to tonight's speaker. In fact, I'm going to stop sharing right now so we can let Julia come on and start sharing. There she is.
Hi, Amy.
Hello. As I said, I am delighted to welcome tonight's speaker. Our very own Julia Burns will be giving a presentation on Charles Willson Peale. Julia is the administrative assistant at the Monroe County Historical Association. So basically my right-hand woman. She graduated cum laude with a bachelor's degree in art history from East Stroudsburg University in 2010. She is a lifelong resident of the Pocono Mountains and is constantly inspired by their beauty. In her free time, Julia loves hiking and photography. She has a great passion for art history and loves sharing this interest with others. Ladies and gentlemen, I am very pleased to welcome Julia, who will give us her presentation, Charles Willson Peale, Renaissance Man. Julia, it is all yours. Take it away.
Thank you, Amy. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in tonight. Today, I'm very excited to share with you about Charles Willson Peale, arguably one of the most fascinating of all Americans. A study of Peale could easily be an entire semester course, and I'm compressing his accomplishments into a single hour. In that hour, I hope you'll see why I find him so entertaining, exceptional, and inspiring. Charles Willson Peale, and his endless enthusiasm for life and all he could learn from it, played a pivotal role in shaping a young America and establishing the importance of culture and education. He was the head of a large and talented family, and he constantly sought beauty, excitement, knowledge, and adventure, and he thrived on sharing these finds with others, most notably with the American public. He was a native of Maryland. Most of his greatest accomplishments occurred in the Philadelphia area. Centuries later, his legacy is still highly relevant in the museum world and in the fields of art and science. In addition to his most notable accomplishments, such as introducing public museums to America and painting stunning portraits of the people who built this country, we also owe to Peale discoveries as far-ranging as exhuming and assembling prehistoric skeletons, to creating the prototype for modern dentures, and inventing a machine that planted corn more efficiently. In today's lecture, I'll share with you Peale's exciting life story, his many achievements, and his enormous contribution to this country. This self-portrait pictured here from 1795, I included this one just because I love the wonderful intensity in his eyes in this rendering. So our Charles Willson Peale was born on American soil, province of Maryland, April 15th, 1741. His father, Charles Peale, was the headmaster at a very prestigious academy in the province. This was a land of untapped beauty. The famous explorer John Smith said heaven and earth seemed never to have agreed better to frame a place for man's habitation than Maryland. They had this idyllic life in America, but very few people knew about the elder Peale's notorious past. He was a man with a taste for fine things in life. He liked lovely clothing, entertainment offerings, and he soon found himself in a lot of debt in the London area. His solution was to embezzle from the British post office. He was sentenced to death, and in 1735, very narrowly avoided the death penalty when he was instead banished to the American colonies. The elder Peale turned this life sentence into a new start, but he couldn't even have imagined the possibilities he was opening up for his son, our Charles Willson Peale. Charles Willson Peale's father died young, at the age of 41. Charles Willson was only 8 years old. His family did not have much money to speak of, but they were talented and they were determined. His mother was an excellent seamstress, so she started making custom dresses for wealthy women. And in the sketches we have here, these are actual popular dresses in the 1740s and 1750s in America. Mrs. Peale could no longer afford the fine education that was offered at her late husband's school. So the children instead went to a more basic school that taught reading and arithmetic. At age 13, Charles Willson Peale becomes a saddlery apprentice. He learned the tedious and complex task of creating riding equipment. This was a commitment of several years. It was very difficult work, but he learned a variety of valuable skills, including carving and metalwork. He put such intense effort and focus into these tasks that the other apprentices liked to make fun of him, and they called him sober sides. I chose the images shown here to show that from Charles' humble beginnings, putting all his effort into mastering the craft of making saddles, then in these later paintings, you see expertly rendered portraits of men on horseback, all painted by members of Peale's family. On the left, his son Rembrandt Peale. In the center, his brother James Peale. And on the right, his niece Sarah Peale. All of these artists were taught by Charles Willson Peale. So he goes from this young boy, no money, learning how to make saddles. Everything that he did in his life, he put so much hard work into, and ultimately it led to not only an illustrious career for himself, but for his family members. Everything that he did with incredible hard work. Going back to the young Charles Willson Peale, he worked extra hours and saved all his money and very proudly purchased a pocket watch with his earnings. To his dismay, it broke twice. Rather than keep bringing it back and paying for someone to repair it, he took the whole thing apart and taught himself how to fix it. It was never a reliable timepiece, but it did pique his curiosity about the worlds of invention. By 1762, Charles was a happy 21-year-old newlywed, his lovely bride Rachel, and he had dreams of starting his own business. He advertised his services in the Maryland Gazette as Charles Willson Peale Saddler. His life would soon change forever. On a trip to Norfolk, Virginia to purchase more leather, he met an artist who showed Peale oil paintings for the first time. Peale was instantly in love. He set about learning how to paint. Anything he could find out and learn about the practice of painting, he did. At this time, he offered his services for sign paintings for local businesses and groups while continuing to practice. Saddle business did not work out, and he thought maybe he could try watchmaking. So on February 1764, he advertised again in the Maryland Gazette that he was a watchmaker, promptly angered the established watchmaker in Annapolis, who put his own ad retorting that customers should not waste their money on the unskillful and injudicious practice of some men who assume the knowledge of a business to which they are only pretenders. Peale's businesses did not survive, at least these early attempts, but because of these quote-unquote failures, he decided to pursue painting full-time, changed the entire trajectory of both his life and our country. In the summer of 1764, Peale became briefly involved in politics. The key groups at this time in the Maryland area, court versus country. Charles campaigned for a country politician named Samuel Chase, who was later a signer of the Declaration of Independence. He also joined a very radical American group called the Sons of Liberty. They advocated for the interests of the colonies. On the left, we have an invitation to one of their meetings. Some of the notable members of the group include Samuel Adams, who founded it, Benedict Arnold, John Hancock, Patrick Henry, Paul Revere, among many others. Unfortunately, a bit like his father, Peale had many debts to wealthy men, and these men represented the court politics, and they did not appreciate him supporting a country politician, Samuel Chase, and said, either you pay us back or you stop campaigning. So Peale and his wife ended up leaving Annapolis during the night, trying to find a safer place to live. They first traveled to Queen Anne's country in rural Maryland. At this point, Rachel is pregnant. So when her husband decides to travel to see his sister Elizabeth in Virginia, she stays behind. Charles had an eye for opportunity, and his life flourished greatly because of this. He soon found himself traveling to New England with his brother-in-law, who was named Robert Polk. While shopping at the color shop of John Moffat in Boston, he was invited to Moffat's late uncle, John Smybert's studio. Peale was very impressed by the quality of the work. Smybert had color-painted copies of Italian paintings that Charles Willson Peale had copied engravings of as a child and had never seen them in color before. He observed very carefully and tried to learn from everything he saw. He noticed the composition, the color, paint handling, all the details. He tried to learn as much as he could. While he was working on his own skills, a friend of his brother-in-law's, a wealthy merchant named Nathaniel Carter, saw a small self-portrait that Peale had painted, and he was so impressed that he commissioned Peale to paint his 3 children. Peale was able to stay in Boston for a while, even after his brother-in-law left, by getting a discount rate at an inn, by giving drawing lessons to the innkeeper's son. High-paying clients in Boston at that time only wanted to be painted by John Singleton Copley. So, of course, Peale set about trying to meet him. Copley was an unparalleled talent in America. He rendered portraits with exquisite detail, textures, natural expressions. He developed a very lifelike style that was immediately identified as a Copley portrait. On the left here, we have Paul Revere and Boy with the Squirrel. And you can just see that it's so evident that that's a silk collar and velvet. Just the way that he was able to distinguish from one fabric to the next was incredible. To his delight, Peale was invited to Copley's studio, which he regarded as a great feast. And Copley actually invited him to copy a portrait and give him feedback. They became very good friends. Copley offered support, guidance, education to this budding artist. And on the left, we have another example of a Copley portrait. And again, you can see this beautiful silk and then these sheer layers of fabric. It's just incredible skill, much of which he taught to Peale. In addition to teaching him his portraiture skills, he introduced a new type of artwork to Peale, which is miniatures. It's a very unique craft that was sought after. It was very affordable for people, and it offered a stable income. On the bottom left here, we have a miniature painted by Peale of General Henry Knox, 1778, and you can see the dimensions there, even smaller than what you're looking at on the screen, 1.5 inches by 1 1/8 inches. The one on the right of Colonel John Laurens, only a little bit bigger, 2 7/8 by 2 1/8, and these were quite popular at the time. Despite the friendship and tutelage that Copley offered, Peale realized he couldn't make a living as a portrait painter in Boston, competing with Copley's talent and reputation. In contrast, the Maryland and Virginia area had a shortage of skilled painters, perhaps leaving room for Peale's career to grow down there. So he headed south to see his wife and his newborn son, James. Peale managed financially for a while, painting portraits and then copies of portraits. He still had a lot of outstanding debts. A wealthy friend of his, Charles Carroll Barrister, persuaded most of his debtors to give Peale 4 more years to pay back the funds. All but 4 of them agreed, but Peale's wife, Rachel, had money from her father's estate that she used to pay off the remaining debtors. So in 1766, he finally had the freedom to return home to Annapolis. He didn't know he wouldn't be there for very long. Peale had a friend named John Beale Bordley, who is a quite wealthy man, but a good friend of Peale's. And he commissioned a portrait. And the story goes that Bordley received the portrait at his house, unwrapped it. This is a life-size portrait. So he unwraps it. He stands in front of it for 2 hours straight, completely speechless, and then says out loud to his sister, "Something must and shall be done for Charles." So Bordley decided that Peale should spend no less than a year studying art in London. This was difficult for Peale because he just reunited with his wife and son. Same time, it was an opportunity he couldn't pass up. Bordley found 10 other benefactors willing to contribute to his schooling fund, including the current Maryland governor, Horatio Sharp. Bordley enticed these men, saying, well, if Peale goes there, fulfills his artistic promise, and comes back, he's going to bring honor to Maryland. So people were happy to donate. Bordley's first task after obtaining the funding was to connect Peale with the artist Benjamin West. West was a promising talent, only 3 years older than Peale. He had grown up in Philadelphia and was offered the opportunity to have a career in London after being spotted by wealthy benefactors. He rose to such success as to being appointed as the official history painter of King George III. An expatriate, he did remain in England for the rest of his career. He became president of the British Royal Academy, but he always welcomed American artists warmly when they came to England. One of West's most famous paintings is The Death of General Wolfe, depicting General James Wolfe's heroic death at the Battle of Quebec in 1759 during the French and Indian War. The story goes that the day that he died, he was shot multiple times, and every time he got up, he kept charging, and he finally dies in the arms of all of his men who loved him and revered him. In some of my personal research at the Historical Association, I found out that our own Jacob Stroud, founder of Stroudsburg, namesake of the Stroud Mansion, actually served under General Wolfe and was likely there at this battle. However, the painting doesn't show his likeness because it was painted about 10 years later in England, and West used friends of his for models. So we do have that nice connection there with Jacob Stroud. In 1766, Britain repealed the Stamp Act, and a ship called the Brandon set sail for London in December, carrying many boxes of unused revenue stamps and Charles Willson Peale. It was an 8-week journey. Peale was almost constantly seasick, heavy storms. When he finally arrives in London, the first thing he did was purchase a fine suit to properly meet Benjamin West. It was a light blue dress suit with a beaver hat, gloves, and black stockings. He had a taste for fine clothes just like his father did. He and West immediately hit it off. Peale was astonished at the works in West's studio. West immediately agreed to take him on as a student. He worked as an apprentice in the studio. And in one story, West dropped his palette and it shattered, his paint palette, and Peale was able to put the palette back together. And from then on, that was the only palette that West would ever use. Peale put all of his energy into his artwork. He continued to have a special interest in miniatures, which wasn't West's expertise. So he actually brought in friends of his who were experts in miniatures to fill in that gap in Peale's education. Peale had little extra money to partake in the many entertainment offerings in London. He was intensely homesick for his wife and his family. The painting on the left is a self-portrait by Benjamin West. On the right is a portrait that he painted of Charles Willson Peale. In this painting, he depicts him as a man of nobility. He wanted to encourage Peale in the value and dignity of being an artist, even if you don't have noble birth or inherited wealth. Now, at this time, there were no public museums in London. All great art from the European masters was kept in the homes of wealthy private collectors. West's connections made it possible for Peale to see these collections, but they were very expensive. You actually it was expected to tip the servants every time you moved from one room to the next, so he could not afford to do this. So instead, he connected with other contemporary artists and went to their studios to see their work. And 2 artists that he met up with and befriended in the London area were Sir Joshua Reynolds, depicted in the self-portrait at left, and Angelica Kauffman on the right. Side note, Peale was a major proponent of women in the arts, and he actually named one of his daughters after Angelica Kauffman. While Peale was in London, Parliament passed the Townshend Acts. Major taxes were imposed, ultimately leading to the Boston Massacre, Boston Tea Party. Peale, always a son of liberty still, would never pull off his hat as the king passed by. And he was committing to still doing everything he could to keep his country free. In 1767, the exhibition of the Society of Artists, which was the premier group for artists at the time in England, Peale saw a portrait of Benjamin Franklin, who was at that time in London representing the interests of Pennsylvania. Peale had heard about Franklin and his accomplishments, and he really wanted to meet him. Custom was for there to be a proper introduction letter before he could meet him. He totally bypassed that and tried to talk to him at the exhibition. He sees him across the room, kind of entertaining a lady friend, and he sketched him from a distance. And this is the actual sketch here that he did of Ben Franklin and his lady friend at this exhibit in 1767. He boldly introduced himself. Franklin was not, was not offended, and they became really good friends. I have two of many portraits that he did of him here. You'll notice that the expression in the painting on the left is pretty identical to the one on the right. It was very common that someone could sit for a portrait and then many paintings could be made based on that sitting. So we have one here from 1785 and again from 1789. And they remained close friends until Franklin's death. They shared their love of inventions and mechanics. Summer of 1767, Peale received word that his 2-year-old son had died. He wanted to go home to America. He missed his wife. He was deeply homesick. But his friends, including Franklin, urged him to stay in London and continue his studies. So he stayed for another year. During this time, he joined the Society of Artists, and he exhibited 4 paintings at their spring exhibition. He received many commissions. People wanted him to paint the nobility of London. He chose to paint people such as William Pitt, Earl of Chatham, who was a champion of America and a hero to the colonies, namesake of Pittsburgh, PA. Pitt would not sit for the painting, so he used a statue of Pitt as the model for this. The original painting was sent as a gift to the state of Virginia, and a smaller version to the state of Maryland. It was very well received, but Peale always felt like it wasn't his best work, probably because it wasn't a proper sitting. He finally returned home. It was a 12-week journey this time. And the only thing he brought with him was his art supplies from London that he knew he wouldn't be able to obtain in the colonies. His motto was "Buy American." Sound familiar? In 1772, he's home with his wife, and there's a smallpox epidemic. Rachel, his wife, caught it. She survived, but their baby girl died. And the Peales were again childless, so often losing very young children. Rachel requested that Charles paint this portrait on the left to commemorate this tragedy. They entitled the painting "Rachel Weeping." This is a biblical reference, Rachel weeping for her children. This is something that appears multiple times in scripture of Rachel mourning children, and she's seen as a figure both of sorrow but also of strength. On the right, we see Rachel again, this time under Peale's paintbrush. We see a portrait of him painting Rachel with the lovely, later born Angelica Kauffman, their daughter, on the right. Charles Willson Peale loved his family, and eventually he did see it grow. It would grow a great deal. He commemorated his love for his family in the Peale Family Group portrait, which he worked on between 1783 and 1809, so several years later, but I'll discuss it now. Depicting his wife, children, his brothers James and St. George, and his childhood nurse, Peggy Durgan. A few things I'd like to point out here. On the top right, he has these lovely bust statues. These are actually likenesses of himself, his friend Edmund Jennings, and also of Benjamin West. Peale is shown at left here, and he's observing a sketch done by his brothers, James and St. George, both of whom he personally trained in the arts. As a little visual joke, he has an apple peel on the table, play on their name, Peale. One of the things that he added later on was their beloved dog, Argus, which is in the front. Peale believed that anyone with lessons and practice could become an artist, and he taught many of his family members to how to draw and how to paint miniatures. James and St. George made rapid progress. Also, clearly artistic talent ran in the family. On the left, we have a portrait that Charles Willson Peale did of his brother James painting a miniature. And on the right, we have a painting by James Peale. And you can see, obviously, he must have some raw talent there. But Charles Willson Peale was so skilled that he was able to pass that on so that James could paint this incredible portrait here. Charles had learned a great deal in London and became a much better painter, and as a result, his painting career flourished in the colonies when he returned. People loved the warmth in which he portrayed his subjects. He did still struggle with some debts, but he stayed afloat. He started painting portraits of notable citizens of Philadelphia. John Dickinson, farmer and politician, and his wife and child, Mary and Sally. John was a signer of the Constitution and later governor of Pennsylvania. Dickinson College in Carlisle, PA is named after him. Again, I want to point out here the way that these fabrics are painted here, and the difference. You can see that all the different layers of sheer built up, and then the wonderful folds in the fabric. These are things that he would have learned from Copley, particularly. Among Peale's most notable subjects was George Washington. In 1772, a then 40-year-old colonel in the Virginia militia was reluctant to pose for Peale, but agreed to please his wife, Martha. Peale and Washington became great friends. The painting at left is the earliest known image that we have of George Washington, and then painted by Peale. Washington sat for Peale 7 times between 1772 and 1795. From those 7 sittings, Peale produced over 60 paintings of George Washington. Here we see a later sketch of George Washington, along with a letter from a now close friend, Benjamin West, discussing Peale's many paintings of George. So this was a theme throughout his career, were these paintings of George Washington, some given as gifts to politicians or commissioned for people to make copies of his most famous ones. In the 4 years after returning to America, Peale focused on paying off his debt so the family can move to Philadelphia. During these 4 years, he produced over 150 paintings. In 1774, Raphael Peale was born. This was the first Peale child to be named after a famous artist. Peale ultimately was married 3 times and sadly widowed each time. But from those 3 marriages, he had 17 children. He named almost all of them after notable artists or scientists. This time the colonies were in turmoil. The Boston Tea Party, intolerable acts of Parliament, the Continental Congress in Philadelphia to consult upon the present unhappy state of the colonies. Peale painted a flag for the Independent Company of Baltimore with the phrase, "Liberty trampling upon tyranny, representation or no taxation." I included here, this is actually a snippet from the Virginia Gazette, February 23rd, 1775, and I included it because it has this phrase here, "Liberty trampling upon tyranny." Still working on paying off his debts, he was not so patient with people who owed him money. In the Maryland Gazette, September 1774, he posted the ad, "Mr. Eli Villette, pay me for painting your family picture, Charles Peale." In the very next issue, Villette responded, "Mr. Charles Willson Peale, alias Charles Peale, yes, you shall be paid, but not before you have learned to be less insolent." Eli Villette. He finally did pay off debts in 1775, and he searched for a home in Philadelphia. A pregnant Rachel stayed behind and gave birth to Angelica Coffin. By June of 1776, the whole Peale family lived on Arch Street in Philadelphia. Peale reconnected with Ben Franklin. He met a man named David Rittenhouse, a famous astronomer and instrument maker. Together, the three of them worked on recipes for gunpowder, and they developed a rifle with a telescope. That summer at the State House, Peale listened to the reading of the Declaration of Independence. Peale was a pacifist at heart, but he believed in the cause for independence. So he joined a volunteer militia called the Philadelphia Associates. On August 9th, 1776, he wrote in his diary, "Entered as a common soldier in Captain Peters' company of militia. When on guard that night." He quickly became a first lieutenant. This time, Washington was in New York and not doing well. It was dark times for the colonies. Morale was very low, particularly among the soldiers. Many deserted the army. There was fear of a battle in Philadelphia. Many shops closed. Panic ensued. People moved. Peale found a safe home for his family in Bucks County while he served in the militia. He described the battles he witnessed as the most hellish scenes I have ever beheld. Winter came, and there were long periods of waiting. Peale passed the time painting miniatures of his fellow soldiers. His first term in the militia ended January 14th, 1777. After his first term, he found himself unfortunately caught up in colonial politics. He said, "The differences of opinion here made him enemies in those whom before he considered his best friends." Politics were set aside when he served again for Philadelphia, this time promoted to captain. He was in Philadelphia on August 24th, 1777, when Washington came through on horseback heading to Delaware to intercept the British troops. During the winter of 1777, there was such cold that Peale fell asleep and woke up to find his right hand had become completely numb. It took 2.5 months to heal. The entire time, Peale was terrified that his career as a painter was over. By the time it did heal, his term of enlistment was also over, and he returned to his family. He painted the self-portrait on the left in celebration of his healed hand, depicting him in his militia uniform. Their safe home in Bucks County was not so safe. Lots of danger, lots of conflict. Peale was known to sleep in the woods outside under the cover of leaves with his gun in case someone came for his family. He again found himself thrust into political warfare when he was instructed to seize homes and property of British supporters, which he described as the most difficult, laborious, and disagreeable task I have ever undertaken. After the war and his brief but stressful stint in politics, it took him 2 years to recover. He spoke of his nervous exhaustion during that time. One note I will share from his political career is that he advocated heavily for the abolition of slavery, beginning with slave children born on American soil. Rachel gave birth to future artist and curator Rembrandt Peale in 1778. In 1779, the Supreme Executive Council of Pennsylvania commissioned Peale to paint George Washington. So this is the painting we have at the right here. Peale chose to paint him as though he had just won the Battle of Princeton. There's no stiffness that you may see in old portraits. Instead, he's casual, he's confident, he's victorious, leaning proudly against the celebratory cannons. In the following years, Peale got some income from many requests for copies of this painting. News of impending victory in the war for independence greatly lifted Peale's spirits. There were many celebrations in Philadelphia, and Peale was inspired by the French invention of transparent pictures, which were painted onto a window shade cloth that was primed with wax and turpentine. He and his 2 brothers, again, skilled in the arts, set to work painting portraits for all of the windows in Peale's home. And they painted heroes of the Revolutionary War. On the 3rd floor, the windows read, For our allies. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. Word spread quickly of the great show at Peale's house. People from all over the area came to see the paintings. Incredible sized crowds gathered. As a result, the Peales followed the initial display with other collections, each more spectacular than before. Very important to note, this was Peale's first experience creating and curating a body of work, not just for the wealthy benefactors, but for the enjoyment of the general public. This quite likely planted a seed regarding opening his future museum. Art for the people, not just a private luxury for the wealthy. The image shown here is actually an allegorical print criticizing slavery, but in the interest of time, I include this because the house at the left here was Peale's home at 3rd and Lombard Street, which is the site of his next major undertaking. Also to mention, Peale thought for a while that printmaking could be a good money-making venture, but that didn't work out. Peale had a dream of creating a gallery of great men. Again, he was in debt, his home was not yet paid for, and he had many mouths to feed. He decided to build an addition to the home to house the gallery. He was able to strike up a payment plan with the carpenters, and construction was underway. He offered discounts on miniatures to boost business and income during this time. By fall of that year, it was ready. This was the first public picture gallery in America. It was a long, narrow room. Peale filled it with 30 portraits with gilded frames, ranging from full-length paintings of Washington to smaller portraits of notable heroes, both foreign and American officers. Over the next 2 years, he added a dozen more portraits. This early venture, he did not charge admission. His hope that it would inspire viewers to commission works from him. The gallery initially was quite successful, but this faded. The commissions generated from it were few. But it did, however, give some prestige and esteem to Peale in Philadelphia. Continued to struggle financially. He wrote in 1782 to a friend, the wealthy Dr. Benjamin Rush, that a person with cash is in blast, and he was surely out of blast, and perhaps the good doctor could assist him into blast. The war formally ended with a peace treaty in 1783 that brought Peale great relief. He was asked to create a public demonstration of joy in the form of a triumphal arch in Philadelphia decorated with illuminated paintings. It was actually a series of 3 arches, the center arch 28 feet high, and each side arch 15 feet high. He planned a grand event, and he led construction on the arch topped with statues of justice, prudence, fortitude, and temperance. The top of the arch left a space for a statue representing peace. The statue was to be added to the arch using a swing mechanism that Peale himself had invented at the ceremony himself. The finale of the event would boast a display of hundreds of fireworks and rockets. The night of the event, the rockets were placed too close to the extremely flammable paintings, and a massive fire erupted. One person died, several others were injured, including Peale, whose clothes caught fire, and he broke several ribs trying to put the fire out. The arch was still intact, and he was actually asked to try again. He had to replace the paintings, and this time, no rockets. Unfortunately, he was asked to cover most of this funding for this, and he was surely out of blast. In London, a new invention was debuted that caught Peale's curiosity. In 1780, Philip James de Lutherberg introduced pictures that would move and change colors by means of lighting effects. Peale realized that this was closely related to the transparent pictures he'd been working with, and he set about to create his own version of the display. He worked on it for months, and he added a room at the end of his long gallery with seating for visitors to watch the show. In the May 19th, 1785 edition of the Pennsylvania Packet, it read, "Mr. Peale respectfully informs the public that with great labor and expense, he has prepared a number of perspective views with changeable effects, imitating nature in various movements. Peale referred to these as moving pictures. This was the first use of this term in America. It was a 2-hour show with 5 scenes from nature, including dawn breaking and thunderstorms. Later on, Peale added a depiction of the famous Revolutionary naval battle of John Paul Jones' ship, Bonhomme Richard, capturing the British ship Serapis. At left, we have a portrait that Peale did of John Paul Jones, and at right, we have another artist rendering of the battle itself, Anton Otto Fischer. At first, the new show was a huge success. Unfortunately, the public didn't want to watch the same shows over and over again, and it was time-consuming and expensive to create new ones. By 1790, Peale sold the moving pictures and moved on to his next endeavor. And I want to add that all of these different things he's attempted that haven't necessarily worked out, he's learned from them, and then he uses that in the next endeavor, and he really never lost hope of finding success with these attempts. Okay, Pennsylvania Packet, July 18th, 1786. Mr. Peale, ever desirous to please and entertain the public, will make a part of his house a repository for natural curiosities. The public, he hopes, will thereby be gratified in the sight of many of the wonderful works of nature which are now closeted and but seldom seen. So how did Peale make this jump from being a portrait painter to natural science? Started in the summer of 1783. Peale was asked by a local doctor to do 30 to 40 sketches of bones that were found in Kentucky, mammoth bones. The enormous bones were brought to Peale's gallery. Visitors to the gallery were fascinated by the bones, and his brother-in-law declared that he would travel 20 miles to see them. It occurred to Peale he could make a higher income sharing natural science with his visitors than just with art. He devoted all of his energy into this new project. Peale wrote that this endeavor was a work so difficult that had he known what he was about to undertake, he would have perhaps rather put his hand into a fire. But such is the bewitching study of nature that it expands the mind to embrace object after object, and the desire is still fed in an endless maze of contemplation of the wondrous works of creation. Now remember, Peale did not have a formal education. He scoured every book he could find about natural sciences, including those by Swedish botanist Charles Linnaeus, for whom he would name his next-born son. Now, a sign of his shift from art to science was evident in the individuals he chose to name his children after. This museum, the first science and nature museum in America and the first museum open to the public in America, was formerly named the Philadelphia Museum, but referred to by most as Peale's Museum. In London, the British Museum was generally reserved for nobility and scholars. The general public had very limited access, and there was really no interest in educating them. I've included a few images here. At left, a poster advertising this new endeavor of his. Amusement here with science is combined to please, improve, and cultivate the mind. In the center, we see wild beasts will teach thee. Admit the bear to Peale's Museum containing the wonderful works of nature and curious works of art, 25 cents. The ticket at the right is one of the earliest tickets we have of his museum when it was still at 3rd and Lombard from 1788. Peale's close friends, Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, and we see a portrait at left that Peale did of Jefferson. They were great supporters of this endeavor. Peale was a student of the 18th century Enlightenment and Age of Reason, and he believed greatly in educating the masses. He wrote to Jefferson, "The attainment of happiness, individual as well as public, depends on the cultivation of the human mind." Franklin had founded the American Philosophical Society in Philadelphia in 1743, still quite active in the 1780s, and they were very supportive of Peale, as was the active scientific community in Philadelphia. They served as helpful expertise when needed. The museum's collection began to grow, beginning with the corpse of Franklin's cat. Washington donated a pair of deceased golden pheasants. Lewis and Clark, after their expedition, were encouraged by then President Thomas Jefferson to donate many specimens, both live and deceased, to Peale. Sea captains were encouraged to bring back exotic animals from distant lands, which included a llama, an antelope, an ape, and monkeys. Live animals were kept in a makeshift open-air zoo. When they died, they were preserved and brought into the indoor collection. Peale was a self-taught taxidermist. He experimented with many different methods. The early attempts were successful, but he used very toxic chemicals. Sometimes he would study the shape of the animal, and he would actually create a wooden skeleton complete with muscle tendons to stretch the actual animal skin over. Peale stated that the purpose of his museum was to present a world in miniature. He had many preserved birds on display. To make it look more lifelike, he would paint a watercolor landscape around and behind them to show them in their natural habitat. This was his idea, and that's now standard museum and zoo practice. Along the entire length of the main gallery above the birds were all of Peale's gilded portraits of great men. Now, the many Peale children essentially grew up in the museum. They learned from their father's exhibits. He taught all of them drawing and painting. As mentioned before, he was a major advocate for women's education, and he argued for women's great potential to be accomplished in the arts and sciences. Here we have a copper plate used for printing at the museum in 1810, and then an actual ticket made from this plate, 1814. And it's signed by Charles Willson Peale and Rubens Peale. Several of his sons would later work in the museum. Here we have a letter from 1805 from Rubens Peale, and he's writing to a friend in Tennessee, which is a land that was not too explored at that time, asking if she came across any kind of specimen or anything that might be interesting to include in the museum collection. In addition to preserving nature, Peale debuted new inventions and scientific wonders and curiosities, called them rational amusements. Some of the things that he would entertain crowds with were a static electricity machine. He would have scientific lectures, technical displays. He heard about a device in England that could duplicate letters. It was patented by John Isaac Hawkins. Thomas Jefferson purchased the patent for he and Peale to improve. It was soon realized as a way to trace images and create artistic likenesses of people. It was reconfigured as the physiognotrace, and a traced image was cut into often several layers of paper and used to create these lovely silhouettes. African-American artist and former slave, Moses Williams, specialized in these silhouettes, and he used the machine at Peale's museum to create an image of Charles Willson Peale on the left, and Angelica Peale Robinson on the right, which is Charles' daughter. And you can see just the really lovely fine detail he was able to get at the edges here. You can see wisps and tendrils of hair, little bits of lace. So he really was quite skilled in this craft. These here are silhouettes that were created at Peale's museum, and these are part of the collection at the Stroud Mansion, part of many actually. Here we have Lydia Parker and Sarah Parker. Even after opening the museum, Peale continued to paint portraits to ensure a steady income for his family. His wife, Rachel, sadly died. Within the year, he also lost his mother, his nurse, I mentioned, Peggy Durgan, and his youngest child. He was lonely. He had 6 surviving children that he needed a mother for, and he quickly met a woman at his museum, Betsy DePeister. She was traveling from New York. They married, and she soon found herself trying to discipline a half-dozen children who were previously raised in a very casual and permissive way. In addition, she found herself caretaker of the many live animals in Peale's museum. In 1794, the American Philosophical Society, which I mentioned was started by Franklin, offered to move Peale's museum to the newly built Philosophical Hall. Peale accepted. Peale hoped that this strengthened connection with the society would bring in more money. The home for the museum is currently Independence Hall in Philadelphia. To attract attention, Peale and his sons would carry specimens on a parade through the city. The live animals also moved to the new location in a fenced-in spot nearby. To fully devote his time and energies to the museum, Peale officially retired as a portrait painter. However, he assured the public of the skill and talent of his family members, particularly his sons Rembrandt and Raphael, and his brother James, along with many other Peale artists. Largely to help family members with their careers, Peale formed a society in America that was a counterpart to London's Society of Artists. His group, the Columbianum, was founded in 1794 in Philadelphia, intending to advance the interests of artists in America. He envisioned not only camaraderie and networking, but training, education, places to exhibit work. Unfortunately, there was so much disagreement and discord among the group's members that they disbanded after only one exhibition in 1795. I was able to find here an image of the catalog for this exhibition. It's cropped a bit, but we can see here Charles Willson Peale, James Peale, Raphael Peale, and Rembrandt Peale, and the many paintings that they submitted to this exhibition, 1795. The not-so-retired Charles Willson Peale debuted his famous The Staircase Group, which proved to be one of his most ambitious and well-remembered paintings. And that's seen here. So The Staircase Group, or Portrait of Raphael Peale and Titian Ramsay Peale I. The Staircase Group borrowed an artistic tradition known as trompe-l'oeil, or French for to fool the eye, which was a visual illusion in painting where the eye perceives that what is shown is actually three-dimensional and real. The tradition dates back as far as the 1430s. In The Staircase Group, Peale painted a life-size painting of his sons Rembrandt and Titian ascending a staircase, looking back at the viewer's gaze. He placed, you can see here, an actual wooden step at the base of the painting. And the story goes that the optical illusion was so convincing that when George Washington walked by the painting, he tipped his hat at the boys. The zigzag and spiral design and composition, those repeated patterns were often seen in federal architecture, which was very popular in America at the time, between 1780 and 1830. This painting takes the pomp and circumstance of an old world stuffy painting, and it makes something warm and relaxed and delightfully ordinary. He's elevating everyday family life to high art. In 1794, Peale named his next newborn son Linnaeus, again signifying that shift to his passion for science. In 1795, another son named Franklin after the sadly departed Ben Franklin, who died in 1790. 1798, 18-year-old Titian, shown in this painting, tragically died of yellow fever. Of the 17 children that Peale fathered, many of them did die in their youth. Titian was his chief assistant at the museum, and Peale had envisioned a really bright future for him. In 1801, Peale learns of large bones dug up by a farmer named John Maston in the Hudson Valley. He dreamed of displaying them in his museum. It would surely bring visitors from all over America. As he was now a man of science, he was also fascinated to study this mysterious creature, perhaps the same as the bones he had drawn years before, which were commonly known as the mammoth. This find in the Hudson Valley was the largest collection of bones found in one place. Peale got permission to draw the bones. At first he kept it quiet that he actually wanted to buy them. The bones were packed and shipped to Philadelphia. The thigh bone was so large it didn't fit in luggage, so Peale brought it as a carry-on. Imagine what a sight that would be. He was headed to New York before going back to Philly to meet with his brother-in-law, who was actually covering the cost of this endeavor. So he brought the thigh bone with him and heard that the other bones, which had been delivered in Philadelphia, had attracted a lot of attention. Up to 80 people showed up to see them, and Vice President Aaron Burr was also quite interested. So when Peale returns to Philly, he thought about reconstructing the skeleton of what he assumed was the mammoth. It was clearly bones from one animal, but key ones were missing. So with the blessing of Thomas Jefferson at the Philosophical Society, they gave him a loan of $500 to form an exhibition to dig up the remaining bones at the Maston farm. Peale paid Maston $200 and a gun and new gowns for his wife and daughters. So facts about the expedition, it lasted 5 months. Peale hired 25 workers to dig for $1.12 a day, which was top wages at the time. In addition, hundreds of volunteers showed up to help as well. There were 12 feet of water in the pit with the bones. So Peale, ever resourceful, invents a machine with a rotating chain of buckets that hung from an enormous wooden tripod powered by men walking inside a huge mill wheel. And again, hundreds of volunteers offered to walk inside the wheel. As they dug further, the soil became too soft and unstable, so they had to stop. But they did find several more bones, and ultimately they found everything except the upper part of the skull. In this painting here, the Exclamation of the Mastodon, a couple things I want to point out. For one, you can see in the detail at the right, Peale's family members. He painted 15 of his family members into this painting, when in reality, only Rembrandt was actually there. But again, he was a family man. He loved his family, and he wanted to include them in this great achievement in his career. Another thing that he did is he painted it as though a storm was oncoming. This is something that was popular in art in Europe and England at the time. This kind of idea of man versus the greatness of nature. It's actually a whole theory known as the sublime. He would have been very familiar with that from his studies in England. So he wanted to paint it at the height of drama. Everyone's working, it's backbreaking work, and then a storm's coming on. Ultimately, the bones of 2 animals were unearthed, and Peale spent the next 3 months assembling them with sculptor William Rush and his museum assistant Moses Williams, who, as I mentioned, was a Peale former slave. Peale's methods of assembling, labeling, and creating bone replicas when necessary are practices widely used in museums today that he invented. Some later scientific studies showed that there were errors in his initial assembling, nonetheless a triumphant achievement in his career. Now, his discovery showed that this particular skeleton was not related to an ancient elephant, as they had imagined, like the mammoth, and instead was a mastodon. It was also monumental because it completely upset a theory called the Great Chain of Being, which believed that all creation existed in this world from start to finish, and there was no supporting the idea of extinction. So his discovery showed for the first time that there was evidence that a species could become extinct. So this was an enormous breakthrough in the scientific community. By December of 1801, he put the first skeleton on display in the museum. It was an extra 50 cents for visitors to see the mammoth room. The creature was over 17 feet long, 1,000 pounds. The jaw alone was 63 pounds, and a single tooth just under 5 pounds. So he throws a huge party, music, drinks. He has a grand piano just under the skeleton, and he toasted to the arts and sciences, nursed in a genial soil and fostered with tender care. May their honor prove as durable as the bower which surrounds us. We have a blueprint of the museum here. He had an insect room with a microscope. He still had a part zoo. He had live snakes, and he would often have handling snake shows. We had the taxidermy birds in glass cases. There was a quadruped room that had over 190 4-foot specimens, including a buffalo, a grizzly bear, a hyena, an antelope, and a llama. Whenever possible, Peale would study live animals so that ultimately he could create very lifelike taxidermy. That was very important to him. Peale gained international prestige in the scientific community, and he hoped that that would get him federal funding. He wanted to make a national museum. President Jefferson, very supportive, Congress was very hesitant to use government funds for this, so they turned him down. So then he turned to the state. He asked to use the then unoccupied State House in Philly. His request was granted, and he moved the museum there in June of 1799. In the main gallery, the long room, hung all of his portraits of great men, which by 1808 he had 88 of them. His second wife, Betsy, died in 1804. In his grief, he threw himself into his work, and at this time, he co-founded the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. Really, it was his creation, but his co-founders fronted the money, mainly businessmen and lawyers. And he served as director until 1810. And of course, this is still a major museum and school in Philadelphia. Peale was now 64 years old, and again, he quickly found a wife and mother to his children in a museum visitor. This time, her name was Hannah Moore. Architect Benjamin Latrobe wrote to Thomas Jefferson, "Peale is again married. This is his third ticket in the lottery of marriage." Hannah was warm. She was great with Peale's children, both the young ones and the grown, and she was very supportive of his endeavors. She fit right into the Peale family. Peale had always enjoyed mechanical interests, and in his later years, he focused on inventions. He received the first U.S. patent for an arch wooden bridge, as well as he and his son Raphael together patented a new, safer fireplace that allowed it to be controlled like a stove. As Peale got older, he focused on health and longevity. He believed that man should be able to live 200 years. He spoke against alcohol. He didn't support smoking tobacco. He thought that you should exercise every day. He talked about cultivating serenity of mind. He recommended vegetables be steamed to preserve their nutrients. He was really a pioneer in many of these matters. He also experimented with inventing better false teeth. At age 69, he announced retirement from the museum, turned it over to his son Rubens. He moved to a 100-acre farm near Germantown, PA, as he put, to muse away the remainder of my life. He named the farm Belfield. First thing he did was renovate the house with skylights and energy-efficient equipment of his own design. Peale and Jefferson exchanged many letters about improving and inventing agricultural equipment. Jefferson also loved inventing. Peale used some of Jefferson's designs and vice versa. Peale designed machines for paring apples, planting corn, transporting milk, as well as a new windmill design. He enjoyed the inventing, but not the actual work of the farmer. And as you can see at top left, the spill-proof milk cart, an improved garden fence. And then right here, I included this. This is an earlier design, but this is a fan chair that he invented in 1786. The leather piece here above the chair would move back and forth to cool off the sitter. And this was actually purchased by George Washington. Okay, Rubens visited Belfield. He was a lover of botany and an expert gardener. He worked on the landscape at Belfield. Peale loved the new garden design and started to devote all of his attention to it. He imagined it as an outdoor museum. Flocks of people came to Belfield to see the gardens. They built gazebos, pavilions, outdoor statues. Unfortunately, Peale's retirement made things very difficult financially. He had also put a cotton factory on the farm fields for his sons to run that was not profitable. His son Rembrandt had just returned from studying art in Paris, and he taught him new methods of painting using wax that allowed for subtle glazing. Thus, the paintings he did later in life look very different from the ones he did as a young man. Now, notable to say here is, for the first time in his life, Peale found a love for landscape painting. His whole career was devoted to portraiture, but in this time he spent at Belfield, he loved painting landscapes. Even though so often in his life he struggled financially, Peale regretted nothing. He wrote, "These amusements cost some money and much time, but the labors give health, and happiness is the result of constant employment. Inventions please himself, and they give pleasure to others. The economist will say time, money, labor was misspent. I answer, happiness is worth millions. Though Rubens was running the museum, he asked his father to help with the finances. The State House rent had been raised. Peale entertained moving the museum to Washington or New York. At that point, New York had many similar cultural institutions, and there wasn't enough interest in Washington. While he was in Washington, however, he did add to his portrait collection, including Congressman Henry Clay, future President Andrew Jackson, and, as we have here, President James Monroe. Peale wrote of his disappointment in the government's refusal to help him in a letter to Jefferson, saying, "The time will come when they shall be sorry for having let it slip through their fingers." As a side note, Peale never saw a national government-funded museum in his lifetime. In the decades after his death, his institution dissolved, animals sold to P.T. Barnum, some artifacts destroyed by fire, but his portraits were mainly purchased by the city of Philadelphia when the museum closed, and many are still on display at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and at the Independence National Historical Park Collection. In this way, they do carry on that legacy that he envisioned. The last years of his life were a struggle. There was a financial crisis in 1819 and another yellow fever epidemic, which claimed the life of his third wife, Hannah, in 1821. Peale actually contracted it too, but recovered. Peale was concerned about the finances of the museum and for leaving something for his children. He wanted to incorporate it for them, so he appointed a board of 5 trustees. The first thing they did was ask him to paint a full-length portrait of him in the museum to gain attraction. And here we have perhaps his most famous painting, The Artist and His Museum. One of the things I want to mention initially is his use of emblems. So there was a grand style of emblematic portraiture that he would have been taught when he was in London, in which symbols were placed in the painting that would have been familiar to the audience to educate them and give them a better context of what the painting really meant beyond just the visual that you see. In this case, he used emblems that were propaganda for America. The first one I'll mention is the bottom left here. We have a limp, recently deceased turkey next to his taxidermy tools. So we know that he's going to restore this turkey to its former glory in his museum. Also, the turkey was actually considered to be our national animal and only lost by 1 vote to the bald eagle. And Franklin was one of the people that wanted the turkey. So that symbol was very well chosen. We see some of the early mammoth bones here and their kind of raw potential. We see his palate that served him so well over the years. Behind the curtain, we see just a glimpse of this mastodon skeleton. And then over to the left here, a woman in Quaker dress, completely delighted and in awe at the sight of the mastodon. You can see how small she is and how massive the mastodon skeleton is. We also see a man with his son taking in the education of the row of birds, and then a man in the far back taking in the gilded portraits atop of the great men. Also, I want to notice that the spotlight on his head here and in his hand, it's a small thing, but it's something that he invented, that type of spotlight. Peale continued to hone his design of dentures, an endeavor that his children thought was embarrassing. He settled on a design that he was proud of. He advertised it in a Philadelphia newsletter in May 1826. Not a successful business venture for him because they were very expensive to manufacture, but another crowning achievement in his career. He longed to marry again. He was 85 years old, but remember, he hoped to live to 200, so 85 is pretty young. An acquaintance told him of an elderly woman who taught at a school for the deaf in New York. He traveled to meet her, and within a few days, he proposed marriage and offered to teach her how to make false teeth. Neither offer was accepted. Peale returned to Philadelphia. He soon fell ill, and he died on February 22nd, 1827. People of all walks of life gathered to remember and honor this great man. Peale loved America. He spent his entire life trying to better her and to bring education and joyful amusements to the American public. Centuries later, his legacy is as vibrant and important as ever. I have a postscript slide. These are letters from Benjamin Franklin Peale, Charles' son, to our local Luke Broadhead. And these are part of the Monroe County Historical Association collection. Among many topics covered in these letters, Franklin Peale actually invites the Broadheads to visit the Peales in Philadelphia. And that's my presentation. Thank you very much for listening.
That was wonderful.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you. Well, and we know we work in a 225-year-old building. It does get pretty toasty, so I think all the staff deserves to get some of those fan chairs.
Yes, I agree.
Get a workout and at the same time. That was great. Thank you so much, Julia. Now I hope you have your answer hat on, because we have lots of questions for you.
Okay.
Okay. First one, are there any historical markers in Philadelphia related to Peale?
I know that they are, but I'm not sure where they're located.
Well,
when I was researching him, I came across several of them, but I'm not sure exactly where they're located.
Right. I did, since that question did come in early, I did Google that real quick, and there is one in Philadelphia on 3rd and Lombard Street.
Which is where his first home was there. So
exactly.
So that makes perfect sense.
Right. There's also apparently one in Maryland marking his birthplace.
Okay.
Queen Anne's County. So I guess Pennsylvania and Maryland are both claiming him.
Yes. I don't blame them.
Right. Excellent presentation and delivery.
Thank you.
How long would it take Peale on average to complete one of his portraits?
It's hard to say. I mean, when he was really trying to pay off his debts, I think he was going through them pretty quickly. But then other ones, like the Peale family portrait, he worked on that for 20 years. He would just keep adding to it here and there. So it depends on whether it was like a commission or something that he was doing for his own amusement.
Right. I guess that would make sense. If it's a commission, he's going to want to get moving on it to the next job.
Mm-hmm.
Sense. Good. Does the Peale Museum still exist? Is there anything else named for him? Cities, universities, anything like that?
I'm not sure. I mean, most of his paintings are on display in various museums across the country. I'm not sure as far as namesakes. But the staircase group that I showed, should I pull up that picture? That's at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And I included this particular, so you can see how it actually looks and how lifelike it is in that setting. I know they had actually taken it down last year and they were working to restore it a bit. And it was supposed to come back up this year. I'm not sure if it did because of everything with COVID.
Yes, I remember seeing that piece in the Philadelphia Museum of Art.
Mm-hmm. Now the other portrait, the most famous portrait of him holding back the curtain, is at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts.
Okay. I hope that this is a comment. I hope that this is the first of a series of lectures about Pennsylvania artists. It was great.
Oh, that's great.
If anyone else that you love, Julia, you could be on that for 2021.
Okay.
Excellent presentation. Thank you, Julia. Is there a name for the French window painting technique? And are there any examples remaining of the Peale window paintings?
I was not able to find any images and I did some scouring. As far as the name, I could look it up. I mean, if that person wants to send me an email, I could certainly look it up for them.
Great. This is about his home when he retired, the Bellisfield house.
Mm-hmm.
It's on the historic registry, you said.
Yes. Yeah, it was put on the registry in the 1960s.
So it's still standing?
Mm-hmm.
Is it a private residence? Is it public, open to the public? Do you know?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Let's see, we got that question. Did Peale exhibit any other artists' work in his museum?
Yes. And really, I could devote a whole other lecture to all of his family members that excelled in the arts as well. And he was very much wanting to promote his family members as well as himself.
Right, but no one really much outside his family. Pretty much just his family was his.
Well, like I said, Moses Williams, who is, it's kind of a complicated relationship. He was a former Peale family slave who ended up kind of growing up in Charles Willson Peale's home, and taught art by Charles. And he was kind of the expert silhouette person at the museum.
Gotcha. Did Peale have any art students aside from his family members?
Not that I found in my reading, but there's so much to him. I feel like I only scratched the surface, even though there was a lot there.
Right.
I mostly read about him teaching his everyone in his family. Actually, I can go back and show you one of the early slides. I mentioned that this one was painted by his son on the left.
Mm-hmm.
This is his brother, James. And then on the right, this is James' daughter, Sarah. So anybody who was interested, Peale would teach. And he had such a massive family.
Are there any known artists since Peale's earliest work who were said to be influenced by his portraits? Did his works have signature or distinctive details? For example, you mentioned the spotlight effect that he used in the one portrait.
Mm-hmm.
This was a truly amazing presentation. You're a great speaker and educator.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really not sure. That's something I'd love to learn more about, but I don't have an answer at this time for it.
Okay.
Other than seeing some of that in it, in the portraits by his family members, who obviously were very directly influenced by Peale. So he would have passed on some of his personal techniques to them. But as far as artists outside the family, I'm not sure.
Well, so Peale had 17 kids, and you said 6 of them survived to adulthood?
I don't know the exact number. He had 17. It was 12 in his first marriage, 5 in his second marriage, and then none of the third. But
so there has to be Peale descendants still running around Philadelphia or
yeah,
something.
I did a little research into that. I found a couple fun stories. One of them, there was actually an article in the Washington Post covering a Peale family reunion that happened in the Philadelphia area. And the journalist took a point to mention that Charles Willson Peale would occasionally sign his paintings with a little painting of an orange peel. And he said that I believe that he passed on that wit to his descendants, who for this gathering had ordered a massive chocolate cake. And the whole top of the cake was that, I'll pull it up right here, this painting of the Peale family group, which they devoured. So that was fun. And then the other thing I found, it was an article about an art consultant in the Philadelphia area. And she was asked to help acquire this painting for an exhibition somewhere. So she's working with Peale family descendants, and around this time, she just kind of happens to look up her own ancestry and found out that she was actually related to the Peales as well. So there's probably a lot of people in Philadelphia that may not even know they're related to the Peales because there's just so many.
Many of them.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe I had never seen those the miniatures, the small.
Yes.
I'm really glad in your presentation you pointed out the size of them, because I picked that up.
Even smaller than what you saw on the screen.
Right, an inch by an inch.
And they wouldn't have taken too long to create once they got good at them. And they would have been really affordable, so you could sell them, en masse. So they really were a great source of income for him.
Well, it's certainly like a who's who of early American history. I mean, anyone that he didn't paint, and
one thing that's funny when you say who's who, that I noticed them in my studying for this, is they said that of all of the artists born, at this time in the colonies, the most talented were Johnson Copley, Benjamin West, and Peale. But Peale's the only one that stuck around. I mean, the other two went and had illustrious careers in London, and Peale stayed in the Americas and tried to better them. Right. Using his talents. So he learned from both of those two, and no disrespect to them, but he stayed behind to kind of try to shape America.
Right. What is your favorite Peale painting?
My favorite Peale painting is the one that I showed in the very beginning. this self-portrait from 1795. I really love it because I feel like it's so unique. It has this raw emotion and intensity as an expression. I love the way that he's gazing out at the viewer. You know, it's not just a nice, pretty portrait. It really moves the viewer, makes you wonder what he's thinking about. So I think it has this intensity that's a little different from his other paintings.
It's true.
Mm-hmm.
He might look a little crabby.
I feel like he's got a lot going on in his mind there.
I think so. I think that's it. That's it. Okay, so your favorite Peale painting. How about your favorite Peale invention?
My favorite invention is that he made a prototype of dentures. And the reason for that is I just think it's so funny when I read that his children were so embarrassed of him trying to market this. Now you have this great man, he's so accomplished, he's friends with presidents, and what a lovely, ordinary thing that his children found him embarrassing. I just love that.
And it's funny, you know, he knew Washington. You said he painted him 7 times?
He sat for him 7 times, painted.
He needed dentures.
Oh, what's that?
Washington needed dentures. You know, he had
a lot of people did.
Well, that's true too. That's wonderful. I think that is all the questions we have. I'm kind of going back and forth between email and the Q&A function and the chat. People are just saying, you know, thank you so much. I've viewed many of Charles Willson Peale's paintings in museums over the years, but never knew his full history. Thank you so much for the information. Great job.
That's wonderful.
Let's see if there's any more questions as I just kind of peruse here. I think we answered them all during this session. I think we're doing pretty good. Well, thank you again so much. You put a lot into this, and it's clear that you love it.
I do, yeah.
In the office, I've been getting little snippets of the stories, and your enthusiasm certainly comes through for this subject. And
I feel like he's my buddy now. I just know so much about him.
He is your buddy. You should be invited to the next reunion.
Yes.
Thank you, Julia, for all of your work on this great
presentation. Thank you, Amy, and thank you everyone who watched.
Your time tonight. We appreciate it. Have a great night, everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, take care.